The whip cracked through the morning air like a gunshot. Marguerite's knees slammed into the cobblestones of the town square, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through her legs. Her wrists were bound to the punishment post with rope so tight it had already cut into her skin, thin lines of blood trickling down her forearms. The autumn wind bit at her exposed back, raising goosebumps across her pale skin. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging, pitying, hungry for the spectacle of her suffering. Alpha Théodore stood on the elevated platform above her, his face carved from granite, emotionless as a statue. His hand gripped the whip, braided leather with cruel metal tips designed specifically to tear flesh from bone. He raised his arm. The crowd fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The whip sang through the air. It connected with Marguerite's back with a sound like thunder splitting the sky. Her scream tore from her throat, raw, animal, full of an agony so complete it seemed to swallow the entire square. Blood welled up instantly, a bright crimson line splitting her pale skin from shoulder to hip. She gasped for air, her entire body shaking. 19 more strikes. She wouldn't survive. She knew she wouldn't survive. Théodore raised his arm again, and then a sound, small feet running, pounding across cobblestones. A blur of dark curls and a worn cotton dress. A child's voice, high and desperate and absolutely fearless. "Don't hurt my mommy." Céleste threw herself across Marguerite's bleeding back. Her tiny arms spread as wide as they would go, trying to cover her mother's body with her own. Her small face was fierce, streaked with tears. Her mouth set in a determined line that would have been comical on anyone else but was somehow devastating on this 4-year-old child. "Don't hurt her. Please. Don't hurt my mommy." The entire square froze. 300 people, all holding their breath, all staring at the impossible tableau before them. A child shielding her mother from an alpha's justice. A tiny Omega girl defying the most powerful man in the province. Théodore stood with the whip still raised, his arm locked in mid-swing, his face frozen in an expression of absolute shock. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes widened. For the first time in 27 years of rule, he didn't know what to do. Before I tell you what happens next, before I show you how this one moment changed everything, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now. Click that button. Because what unfolds in the next few minutes will shatter everything you thought you knew about power, about mercy, about the bonds between parent and child that can break even the hardest hearts. And here's what I want you to do. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can send you a virtual hug. Because I promise you, you're going to need it. This story will wreck you in the best possible way. Now, let me take you back. Let me show you how we got here. Let me show you the desperate hunger, the impossible choices, and the moment when everything started to fall apart. 6 months before that terrible morning in the square, autumn had already begun to sink its teeth into Montclair. The air carried the bite of approaching winter, and the leaves on the oak trees had turned the color of old blood before falling to carpet the streets in rust and gold. Marguerite lived in the Omega district, in a cramped room above Armand the tanner's shop. The accommodation could barely be called a room. It was more of a storage space that Armand had grudgingly converted when Marguerite had begged him for shelter 3 years ago, after her bondmate died and left her with nothing but debts and a 1-year-old daughter. The room was perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet. It contained a narrow bed that Marguerite shared with Céleste, a cracked basin for washing, a small fireplace that smoked more than it heated, and a wooden crate that served as their table, storage, and everything else. The walls were thin enough that every sound from the tannery below rose through the floorboards, the scraping of blades against hide, the splash of caustic chemicals, the shouted conversations of the workers. And the smell. God, the smell. The acrid, penetrating stench of curing leather that seeped into everything they owned, every piece of clothing, every strand of hair, even the taste of what little food they could afford. Marguerite paid 12 coins a week for this privilege. She earned, on a good week, perhaps 15. 3 coins. That's what she had left after rent to feed herself and her daughter, to buy lamp oil for light, to patch their clothes when they tore, to save, laughably, for winter when heating would become necessary instead of merely desired. 3 coins to survive. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. But Marguerite tried. Sweet merciful heavens, she tried. Every morning she woke before dawn. She would kiss Céleste's forehead. The child barely stirred, so used to her mother's early departures, and she would descend the narrow stairs to begin her rounds. First, she went to the river where the washing women gathered. If she arrived early enough, if she was lucky, one of the alpha households might need extra hands. Washing clothes was back-breaking work. Your hands in freezing water for hours, your back bent over the stones, your knuckles scraped raw from the harsh soap. But it paid 2 coins for a full day's work. If there was no washing work, she would go to the market and offer to carry goods for the merchants. 1 coin for a morning of hauling heavy sacks and crates. If that didn't materialize, she would sweep streets, scrub floors in the beta shops, mend clothes for anyone who would hire her. Her stitches were small and neat, practiced from years of patching her own and Céleste's threadbare garments. Some days she earned enough. Most days she didn't. And every day, she watched her daughter get thinner. Céleste was 4 years old, though she looked younger. She was small for her age, her arms like delicate bird bones, her ribs visible through her skin when Marguerite bathed her in their chipped basin. Her face was all eyes. Enormous blue eyes that seemed too large for her small face, eyes that held a wisdom no 4-year-old should possess. She never complained. That was the thing that broke Marguerite's heart over and over again. Céleste never whined about being hungry. She never cried when dinner was a piece of stale bread and weak broth. She never asked for the sweets other children ate, or the toys they played with, or the warm coats they wore when winter came. Instead, she would smile at her mother, that devastating, brave, heartbreaking smile, and say things like, "I'm not very hungry tonight, Maman. You should eat my portion. You work so hard today." Or, "This bread is delicious. Is it a special kind? It tastes different." It wasn't special. It was 3 days old and hard as stone. Marguerite had soaked it in water to make it chewable. Or worst of all, "When I grow up, I'm going to work hard and buy you a big house with a fireplace that doesn't smoke. And we'll have bread every day. As much as we want. And you won't have to wash clothes in the cold river anymore." These statements, delivered with complete sincerity by a 4-year-old child who should have been worried about nothing more serious than which games to play, destroyed Marguerite a little more each time she heard them. She was failing her daughter. Every day, with every insufficient meal, every cold night, every cough that lasted a little too long, she was failing the one person in the world who depended on her absolutely. The weeks turned colder. September became October. October crept toward November. And Céleste started coughing. Started small. Just a little cough, the kind any child might get as the weather changed. Marguerite wasn't worried at first. She made sure Céleste stayed warm, gave her extra blankets at night, saved the better portions of their meals for her daughter. But the cough didn't go away. After 3 days, it had settled deep in Céleste's chest, a wet, rattling sound that made Marguerite's stomach clench with fear every time she heard it. The child's forehead felt warm to the touch. Not burning with fever, not yet, but warmer than it should be. Marguerite went to see Thérèse, an old Omega woman who knew herbs and remedies. Thérèse listened to Céleste's chest, her weathered face growing grave. "She needs food," Thérèse said bluntly. "Real food. Meat, bread, vegetables. Her body can't fight this on an empty stomach. And she needs to stay warm. If this gets worse, if it turns to lung fever." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "How much?" Marguerite asked. "For medicine. Medicine won't help if she's starving. Feed her first. 3 good meals a day for a week and keep her warm. Then we'll see if she needs medicine. 3 good meals a day. For a week." Marguerite did the mathematics in her head. That would cost more than she had. More than she could earn in a week. More than she could borrow. She'd already borrowed from every Omega who would lend to her, and they were all as poor as she was. That night, she watched Céleste sleep, listened to that terrible rattling cough, and made a decision. The morning frost painted the windows white. Marguerite woke to find Céleste shivering despite the 3 thin blankets piled on top of her. The child's lips had a faint blue tinge. "I'm cold, maman," Céleste whispered. Marguerite pulled her daughter close, trying to warm her with her own body. "I know, my love. I know." She had 13 coins. That was everything. Every coin she'd managed to save over the past 2 weeks. She went to the bakery first. The owner, Monsieur Bertrand, was a beta. Not cruel but not kind either. Just a man trying to make a living in a world that gave him a little more privilege than the Omegas and a little less than the Alphas. 3 loaves, Marguerite said. "Your freshest. Please." 15 coins, Bertrand replied without looking up from the ledger he was writing in. Marguerite's heart sank. "I have 13. Then you can buy 2 loaves and 2 rolls. Please, monsieur. My daughter is sick. She needs food. I can pay you the extra 2 coins next week. I swear it." Now Bertrand looked up. His expression wasn't unkind, but it wasn't sympathetic either. It was tired. "If I gave credit to every Omega with a sick child, I'd be bankrupt in a month. 13 coins buys 2 loaves and 2 rolls. That's my offer." 2 loaves and 2 rolls wouldn't be enough. Marguerite knew this with the certainty of a mother who'd been rationing food for months. It would last maybe 3 days if she was careful, less if Céleste was actually eating proper portions. And she needed a week of good food. At least a week. She looked at the bread behind Bertrand. Dozens of fresh loaves, still warm from the oven, the crust golden and crackling, the smell making her stomach clench with hunger. 2 loaves and 2 rolls then, she said quietly. Bertrand wrapped them and took her 13 coins. Marguerite put the bread in her sack and turned to leave. And then she saw them. 3 more loaves, sitting on the counter near the door. Bertrand had his back turned, already serving the next customer. His son, Julien, was in the back of the shop, loading more bread into the oven. Marguerite's hand moved before her brain could catch up. She grabbed the 3 loaves, shoved them under her shawl, and walked toward the door. Her heart was hammering. Her hands were shaking. Every step felt like walking through deep water. The door was right there. Just a few more steps. Just a little farther. "Stop her!" Julien had seen. He was running from the back of the shop, pointing at Marguerite. His face red with outrage. "She's stealing. The Omega is stealing." Marguerite ran. She didn't think. She just ran, clutching the bread under her shawl, her feet flying over the cobblestones. Behind her, she could hear shouting, running footsteps, the clatter of pursuit. She didn't get far. 2 Alpha guards, Christophe and Marc, she'd seen them around the district, caught her before she'd made it 3 streets. Christophe grabbed her arm with a grip like iron. Marc tore the shawl away. The 3 loaves fell to the ground. A crowd was already gathering. People loved a spectacle, especially when it involved an Omega breaking the law. Julien arrived, panting. He picked up one of the loaves and held it aloft like evidence in a trial. "Thief!" She paid for 2 loaves and tried to steal 3 more. "Omega thief!" He kicked one of the fallen loaves. It rolled across the cobblestones, gathering dirt. Marguerite didn't fight. Didn't struggle. She just stood there, held between the 2 guards, watching the bread that was supposed to save her daughter, get trampled by the gathering crowd. "Take her to holding," Christophe said. "Alpha Théodore will want to judge this himself." They dragged her through the streets. The crowd followed, growing larger with every block, people streaming out of shops and houses to see the Omega thief. Some shouted insults. Others just watched with that peculiar mixture of pity and satisfaction that people feel when they see someone worse off than themselves. Marguerite caught sight of Geneviève in the crowd, the old Omega who lived 2 doors down from her. Their eyes met. Genevieve's face crumpled with sadness. She mouthed something. "Your daughter. I'll take care of her." Then the guards pulled Marguerite around a corner, and Geneviève was gone. The holding cells beneath the Alpha's hall were cold and dark. They threw Marguerite into one and locked the door. She sat on the stone floor, her back against the wall, and finally let herself cry. Not for herself. She'd known the risk when she'd taken the bread. She'd known what would happen if she was caught. She cried for Céleste. For her daughter who was sick and cold and would wake up to find her mother gone. Who would be frightened and alone. Who would get worse without food, without proper care. Who might die. The thought was a knife in Marguerite's chest. She doubled over, gasping, trying to breathe through the panic. She was going to die. The punishment for theft was lashes, usually 10 to 20, depending on the value of what was stolen. And Omegas didn't survive 20 lashes. Their bodies weren't built for it. The whip would tear her back apart, and even if she survived the immediate punishment, infection would set in. She'd be dead within a week. And Céleste would be alone. An orphan. An Omega orphan with no family, no money, no alpha to protect her. The province would put her in the workhouse where children labored 16 hours a day until they were old enough to be bonded or sold. She survived that long. If her sickness didn't kill her first. Marguerite pressed her face against her knees and sobbed until she had no tears left. Hours passed. Maybe days. It was impossible to tell time in the darkness. Finally the door opened. Light flooded in, blinding after so long in the dark. The guards pulled her out, dragged her up stone steps, through corridors into the judgment hall. Alpha Théodore sat on a raised platform at the far end of the hall. The room was packed with people. Alphas, betas, even some Omegas who'd been required to attend as a reminder of what happened to those who broke the law. Marguerite was forced to her knees before him. Théodore was 45 years old, though he looked older. His face was hard, carved by years of making difficult decisions and never showing doubt. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, of iron, of things that showed no mercy. Marguerite of the Omega district. His voice boomed through the hall, formal and emotionless. You stand accused of theft. 3 loaves of bread, valued at 15 coins. The baker's son witnessed the crime. The guards found the stolen goods in your possession. Do you deny these charges? Marguerite's voice came out as a whisper. No, Alpha. Speak up. The court must hear you. She raised her head, met his eyes. No, Alpha. I don't deny it. I stole the bread. A murmur ran through the crowd. At least she was honest. That counted for something, though not much. Why? Théodore asked. The question surprised her. Alphas didn't usually ask why. The law was the law. Reasons didn't matter. My daughter, Marguerite said. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. If she was going to die, she'd at least die with the truth. She's 4 years old. She's sick. Lung sickness. She needs food, real food, or she'll die. I didn't have enough coins. I thought if I could just get her through this week, if I could feed her properly, she'd get better. I would have paid it back. I swear I would have paid back every coin. I needed to save my daughter. The hall was silent. Théodore's expression didn't change. You stole to feed your child. Yes, Alpha. And you believed this justified breaking the law. No. I know it doesn't justify it. I know I broke the law. I know there are consequences. Her voice cracked. I couldn't watch her die. I couldn't do nothing while my baby got sicker and sicker. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to protect her. I'm supposed to keep her safe. And I failed. I failed at everything else. I can't earn enough, I can't give her a decent home, I can't even keep her warm. But I thought maybe I could at least keep her fed. Just for 1 week. Just long enough for her to get better. Tears were streaming down her face now. She didn't bother wiping them away. Please, she whispered. Please, Alpha. Punish me however you want. I'll take the lashes. I'll take whatever you decide. But please, please let someone help my daughter. She's innocent. She's just a child. Please don't let her die because of what I did. Théodore was quiet for a long moment. His face remained impassive, unreadable. Then he spoke. The law is clear. Theft of property valued at 15 coins carries a punishment of 20 lashes, to be administered publicly in the town square, followed by 1 week in the stocks. This punishment serves as both justice for the crime and deterrent for others who might consider similar actions. He paused. Marguerite felt her stomach drop. If I make an exception for you, if I show mercy because you had a sympathetic reason for your crime, then every thief in this province will claim similar justifications. They will say they had no choice. They will say their need was greater than the law. And the law will become meaningless. Order will dissolve into chaos. Do you understand this? Yes, Alpha, Marguerite whispered. Do you understand that your individual suffering, however genuine, cannot be allowed to undermine the structure that keeps this entire province functioning? Yes, Alpha. Do you understand that if I let you go, I invite anarchy? Yes, Alpha. Théodore leaned forward. Then you understand why I must do this. Why I cannot show mercy, no matter how much I might. He stopped, cleared his throat. The sentence is 20 lashes to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence, followed by 7 days in the stocks. May this serve as a lesson to all. The gavel came down with a sound like breaking bones. Take her back to the cells. When Marguerite didn't come home, Céleste knew something was wrong. Geneviève came for her as the sun was setting. The old Omega's face was kind but sad, and she didn't quite meet Céleste's eyes. Your maman had to go away for a little while, Geneviève said gently. She asked me to take care of you. Where did she go? Céleste asked. The cough rattled in her chest. She had some business with the Alpha. Important business. But she'll be back. 'Twas a lie. Children always know when adults are lying to them. Can I see her? Not right now, little one. Maybe soon. Geneviève took Céleste to her own tiny room, gave her weak soup and a piece of bread, tucked her into a corner pallet. Céleste didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just lay there, coughing occasionally, staring at the ceiling with those enormous blue eyes. Tell me a story, she asked after a while. Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away quickly. What kind of story? A happy one. With a happy ending. So Geneviève told her a story about a princess who lived in a castle and had everything she could ever want and lived happily ever after. It was a terrible story, full of lies about how the world worked, but Céleste listened intently, and by the end she was smiling. I like happy endings, she said. I know, child. Maman will come back, won't she? That will be a happy ending. Geneviève didn't answer. She just stroked Céleste's hair until the child fell asleep. The next day Céleste was worse. Her cough was deeper, her forehead hotter. She didn't want to eat. She just wanted to sleep and ask for her mother. Maman, she would murmur. Want maman. On the 3rd day, the day of the punishment, Geneviève made a decision. She woke Céleste early before dawn, dressed her in her warmest clothes, thin as they were. Took her small hand. Where are we going? Céleste asked. To see your maman. For the first time in 3 days, Céleste smiled. They walked through the dark streets toward the square. More and more people joined them. The entire province had been required to attend. Public punishments were mandatory viewing. The Alpha wanted everyone to understand the cost of breaking his laws. When they reached the square, it was already filling with people. A platform had been erected in the center. The punishment post stood stark against the gray dawn sky. And beside it the whip. Céleste saw her mother being led out in chains. Maman! She tried to run forward, but Geneviève held her back. Not yet, child. Not yet. Just wait. Just watch. And remember that your mother loves you. No matter what happens, she loves you. Marguerite was tied to the post. Her back was bare. She was shaking from cold or fear or both. When she saw Céleste in the crowd, her face crumpled. She tried to say something but no sound came out. She just shook her head desperately, mouthing, No, please, don't let her see. But it was too late. Alpha Théodore mounted the platform. Théodore had not slept the night before the punishment. He'd lain awake in his chambers, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the Omega thief. Thinking about her daughter. He tried to push the thoughts away. He'd sentenced hundreds of criminals over his 27 years as Alpha. He'd never lost sleep over any of them before. The law was the law. Personal feelings couldn't enter into it. But something about this case bothered him. The Omega's face when she'd talked about her child. The desperate sincerity in her voice. The way she hadn't tried to excuse what she'd done, hadn't claimed innocence, had simply accepted her punishment and begged only that someone help her daughter. He found himself wondering, what would I have done if it were my child? If I watched them starving, getting sicker, dying by inches, and I had no legal way to save them? The answer came immediately. I would have stolen too. I would have stolen and killed and burned down the world if that's what it took. But he wasn't an Omega. He was an Alpha. He had power, wealth, resources. He would never be in that position. The Omega thief had no power, no wealth, no resources. She'd had only one choice, and she'd made it, knowing it would cost her everything. And now he had to destroy her for it. At dawn, he rose and dressed in his formal blacks, the clothes he always wore for official punishments. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw his father's face staring back. His father, who had been Alpha before him. His father, who had taught him that mercy was weakness and weakness invited rebellion. His father, who had ordered a 15-year-old Omega boy whipped to death for trying to escape his bonding contract. Théodore had been 17. He'd watched the punishment, watched the boy die. And he'd felt nothing because that's what his father had taught him, to feel nothing, to be the law incarnate. He turned away from the mirror. The square was packed when he arrived. 300 people, maybe more. All required to attend. All watching. All waiting to see justice served. Marguerite was already tied to the post. She looked so small, so fragile. This woman who had risked everything for her child now stood before him, trembling, waiting to die. Théodore picked up the whip. It was heavy in his hand. He'd used it dozens of times before. He knew exactly how to make it sing, how to make it bite, how to make it tear. He raised his arm and saw, in the front row of the crowd, a small child with enormous blue eyes. The Omega's daughter. Their eyes met for just a second. The child wasn't crying. She was just staring at him with an expression of such complete devastation that it hit him like a physical blow. He looked away, focused on Marguerite's back. The law. On his duty. He brought the whip down. The crack echoed across the square. Marguerite's scream followed, a sound of pure agony that seemed to shatter the gray morning. Blood welled up instantly, a bright red line across her pale skin. Théodore prepared for the second strike. And that's when he heard the running footsteps. That's when he saw the child break free from the old Omega holding her. That's when Céleste threw herself across her mother's bleeding back and screamed, "Don't hurt my mommy." Time stopped. Théodore stood frozen, the whip still raised, staring down at the tiny child who had just defied him in front of his entire province. She was so small, 4 years old, maybe younger. Her dress was threadbare, patched a dozen times. Her face was thin from hunger, flushed with what looked like fever. And her eyes, those impossibly large blue eyes, stared up at him with absolute, fearless determination. "Don't hurt her," Céleste said again. Her voice was smaller now but no less fierce. "Please don't hurt my mommy. She's good. She's the best mommy in the world. She only took the bread because I was sick and we were hungry and she didn't know what else to do. It's my fault. If I wasn't sick, she wouldn't have needed the bread. So if you have to hurt someone, hurt me instead. But please, please don't hurt my mommy anymore." The square was absolutely silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single person breathed. Marguerite found her voice. "Céleste, no. Baby, no. Run. Please, please run." But Céleste didn't run. She wrapped her small arms around her mother's waist, trying to cover as much of Marguerite's back as she could with her tiny body. Her face pressed against her mother's shoulder. "I won't leave you," she said. Her voice was muffled but clear. "I won't let you be alone. If he hurts you, he has to hurt me too. Because we're together. We're always together. Something in Theodore's chest cracked. It was a small sound, barely audible, like ice breaking on a frozen pond on the first warm day of spring. But once it started, it spread. Cracks running through the ice of his heart, through the walls he'd built over 27 years of being the law instead of a man. He looked at the child, really looked at her, and saw past the defiance to the terror underneath. She was shaking, trembling so hard he could see it from the platform. But she hadn't run. She hadn't backed down. She'd run toward danger, toward pain, toward possible death, because she loved her mother more than she feared him. 4 years old. And braver than he'd ever been. Théodore looked out at the crowd. 300 faces staring back at him. All waiting to see what he would do. Waiting to see if he would enforce the law, or if this child's courage would break him. He saw his advisors in the front row. Saw their faces, some stern, some curious, all wondering if their alpha had finally met something that could make him bend. He saw the baker and his son, the ones who'd reported the theft. Saw them watching with satisfaction, confident that justice would prevail. He saw the old Omega who'd been holding the child. Saw the tears streaming down her weathered face. He saw dozens of other Omegas, their expressions a mixture of hope and dread, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And he made a choice. Théodore lowered the whip. The crowd gasped. The sound rippled through the square like wind through wheat. Théodore descended from the platform slowly. Each step felt weighted, significant. He was walking away from 27 years of absolute adherence to law. Walking toward something he couldn't quite name yet. He approached the child. Céleste watched him come, her small body tensing, her arms tightening around her mother. "Don't touch her," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "Please don't touch her." Théodore knelt. An alpha never knelt. Especially not in public. Especially not to an Omega. The gasps from the crowd grew louder. His advisors looked shocked. Some outrage. He ignored them all. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Céleste stared at him for a long moment. Then, "Céleste. Céleste. That's a beautiful name. It means heavenly. Did you know that?" The child shook her head slightly. "Your mother gave you a very special name." He paused. "Can you tell me why you ran up here? Why you're trying to protect your mother?" "Because she's my mommy," Céleste said, as if this explained everything. And perhaps it did. "And you were hurting her. And that's wrong. It doesn't matter what she did. Hurting people is wrong. Your mother stole bread. That's against the law." "I know." Céleste's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "But we were hungry. I was sick. She didn't have any money. What was she supposed to do? Just let me die?" "No," Théodore said quietly. "No, she couldn't do that. Because she's your mother, and mothers protect their children. Even when it costs them everything." "Then why are you punishing her?" It was such a simple question. Such a devastating question. "Because." Théodore started, then stopped. Why was he punishing her? Because it was the law. Because theft had consequences. Because if he showed mercy to one, all would demand mercy. But as he looked into this child's eyes, as he saw the fever flush in her cheeks, the thinness of her arms, the threadbare clothes hanging on her small frame, all those reasons felt hollow. He was punishing Marguerite because the law said he must. But the law was his. He'd enforced it, upheld it, never questioned it. The law was whatever he decided it was. And he'd decided it should be cruel. "You're very brave," he said to Céleste. "Do you know that? Running up here, putting yourself in danger to protect your mother. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I'm not brave," Céleste said. "I'm scared. But I love my mommy more than I'm scared. So I had to help her." And there it was. The truth that Théodore had spent his entire adult life trying to avoid. Love was stronger than fear. Love made 4-year-old children run toward whips. Love made mothers steal bread even knowing it would cost them their lives. Love was the force that held packs together, not fear. Not law. Love. And he'd built an entire society on fear. Théodore stood. He turned to face the crowd. Every eye in the square was on him. 300 people waiting to see what their alpha would do. Waiting to see if he would become something new or remain what he'd always been. I have been alpha of this province for 27 years, he said. His voice carried to every corner of the square. In that time, I have presided over hundreds of judgments. I have punished hundreds of criminals. I have enforced the law without exception because I believed, because I was taught, that consistency was justice, that mercy was weakness, that the law must be absolute or it becomes meaningless. He paused, gathering himself for what came next. I was wrong. The crowd erupted. Shouts of surprise, anger, confusion. His advisors were on their feet, trying to call for order. But Théodore raised his hand and the square fell silent again. This child, this brave, beautiful child, has shown me something I had forgotten, something I buried so deep I thought it was gone forever. She has shown me that true strength isn't in the whip. It isn't in punishment or fear or absolute adherence to rules. True strength is in knowing when to bend. Knowing when mercy serves justice better than cruelty. Knowing when the law itself is wrong. He walked to Marguerite, pulled his knife from his belt, and cut her bonds with a single stroke. You are pardoned, he said clearly. You and your daughter both. You will not be punished for trying to save your child's life. Because that's not a crime. That's love. And I will not punish love. Not today. Not ever again. Marguerite collapsed. Her legs gave out completely and she would have fallen if Théodore hadn't caught her. He lowered her gently to the ground. Céleste was instantly there, throwing her arms around her mother, sobbing with relief. Maman, you're okay, you're okay. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. Marguerite held her daughter tight, her own tears flowing freely. You were so brave. So brave. Théodore stood and addressed the crowd again. From this day forward, the laws of Montclair will be reviewed. We will not eliminate consequences for genuine crimes. Violence, deliberate harm, those will still be punished. But we will show mercy where mercy is warranted. We will remember that we are not just alphas and omegas and betas. We are people. We are families. We are a pack. And a pack protects its own, especially the most vulnerable among us. He gestured to his advisors. Establish a fund for unbonded omegas with children. Ensure that no one in this province must choose between feeding their family and breaking the law. Find Marguerite and Céleste proper housing. And he paused, his voice thick with emotion. And bring them food. Real food. Enough for a week. Enough for this child to get better. Then he did something that shocked even himself. He turned back to Marguerite and Céleste and knelt before them again. I am sorry, he said simply. For your suffering. For my blindness. For the system that pushed you to the point where stealing was your only option. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I would be honored. If not, I understand. Marguerite stared at him through tears. You spared us, she whispered. You gave us our lives back. There's nothing to forgive. There's everything to forgive. But I will spend the rest of my days trying to earn it. The changes didn't happen overnight. They couldn't. Systems built over generations don't crumble in days. But they began. Théodore's first act as a reformed alpha was to personally oversee the establishment of what he called the Providence Fund. It was simple in concept. Every alpha household in the province would contribute 1% of their monthly income. That money would go directly to unbonded omegas, widows, orphans, and anyone else who couldn't support themselves through no fault of their own. The alpha families resisted, of course. Why should we pay for omegas who can't care for themselves? They demanded. It's not our responsibility. It is exactly our responsibility, Théodore replied. We are the strongest. We have the most resources. We have benefited the most from this system. And it is our duty to ensure that the weakest among us don't starve. This is not charity. This is justice. The grumbling continued, but no one defied him directly. He was still alpha. His word was still law. The second change came in housing. The Omega district, with its cramped rooms above smelly shops, its buildings that leaked and smoked and barely kept out the cold, was torn down. In its place, new housing was constructed. Not luxurious but decent, clean, with proper fireplaces and solid walls and windows that closed. Marguerite and Céleste were given one of the first completed cottages. It had 2 rooms, a main living space with a kitchen area and a proper fireplace, and a small bedroom with an actual bed, not just a pallet on the floor. The windows had real glass. The door closed tight. The walls were thick enough that you couldn't hear every sound from your neighbors. The first night they spent there, Céleste walked through the rooms touching everything with wonder. "Is this really ours, maman? Really truly? Really truly?" Marguerite said, her voice thick with emotion. "And we don't have to leave. We don't have to leave." Céleste climbed into the Real bed, under the thick blankets that had been provided, and smiled that devastating smile. "This is the happiest day of my whole life." Marguerite lay down beside her daughter and held her close, listening to her breathe, feeling her warmth. The cough had finally started to fade after a week of proper food and warmth and rest. Céleste was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. For the first time in 3 years, Marguerite let herself believe it. The third change came in employment. Théodore established a program where Omegas could learn trades beyond just washing clothes and hauling water. They could apprentice in workshops, learn to read and write, even study healing or accounting if they showed aptitude. Marguerite was offered a position in the Alpha's household, not as a servant but as an advisor. "You understand what it's like to be at the bottom," Théodore told her. "You understand what Omegas need, what they struggle with, what the system does to them. Help me fix it. Help me make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." She accepted. It was strange at first, walking through the Alpha's hall as someone important rather than someone invisible. Strange to sit in meetings with Alphas and Betas, to have her opinions not just heard but valued. Strange to be treated as a person rather than property. But she learned quickly. She had ideas, good ones, about how to improve life for Omegas throughout the province. Better wages, safer working conditions, access to healers, education for Omega children so they could have more options in life than just bonding or backbreaking labor. Slowly, painfully, Montclair began to change. But change always has enemies. 6 months after Théodore pardoned Marguerite in the square, a delegation of Alphas came to see him. They were led by Henri, one of the oldest and most traditional Alphas in the province. "This has gone far enough," Henri said without preamble. "These reforms of yours are destroying everything our ancestors built. Our ancestors built a system where children starved while Alphas feasted," Théodore replied calmly. "I'm not interested in preserving that. Children have always starved. That's the nature of the world. The strong survive, the weak perish. It's how it's always been, how it should be. Then we'll change what should be." Henry's face reddened. "You're making us weak. The other provinces are laughing at us. They say Montclair has gone soft, that our Alpha has been swayed by Omega tears, that we'll be easy prey when they decide to expand their territories." "Let them try," Théodore said quietly. "They'll find that an Alpha who protects all his people, not just the strong ones, is far more dangerous than one who rules through fear alone. Because my people will actually fight for me. Will yours?" The question hung in the air. Henri had no answer. He and his delegation left, muttering threats that never quite materialized into action. But the resistance didn't end there. Just went underground. Whispers started circulating. The Alpha had gone soft. The Alpha had been bewitched by an Omega. The Alpha was weak. The old ways were better. The old ways were stronger. Some families left the province, moving to territories where Alphas still ruled with iron fists and Omegas still knew their place. "Good riddance," Théodore muttered when he heard. But others stayed and simmered with resentment, waiting for an opportunity to prove that mercy was weakness, that the old ways were right. That opportunity came 5 years after Céleste ran across the square. Alpha Bastien ruled the province of Fortcourt to the east. He was everything Théodore had once been. Hard, uncompromising, absolutely convinced that hierarchy was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. When he heard about Montclair's reforms, he saw an opportunity. "They've gone soft," he told his war council. "Their alpha coddles omegas. Gives them money and housing and rights. His own people are divided. Half of them hate what he's done. They'll welcome us as liberators when we march in and restore proper order." So Bastien sent an envoy to Montclair with an ultimatum: reverse all reforms and return to traditional law, or face invasion. Théodore received the envoy in his hall. He read the ultimatum carefully, then looked up at the beta who delivered it. "Tell your alpha that Montclair will not return to a system that values some lives over others. Tell him we choose mercy over cruelty, hope over fear, growth over stagnation. And tell him that if he insists on invasion, he will learn exactly how strong an alpha becomes when he fights for all his people, not just the privileged few." The envoy bowed and left. War came 3 weeks later. Bastien's army crossed the border at dawn. 5,000 soldiers, well-trained and well-armed, against Montclair's force of barely 2,000. The odds weren't even close. The first skirmishes went badly for Montclair. Théodore's soldiers fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Within 2 days, Bastien's forces had taken the eastern quarter of the province and were advancing steadily toward the capital. Théodore gathered his war council. The mood was grim. "We can't win a straight fight," his general Luc said bluntly. "They have us 3-1. Our only option is to retreat, regroup, maybe try guerrilla tactics in the forests." "If we retreat, they'll occupy the capital," Théodore said. "They'll reverse every reform. They'll punish everyone who supported the changes. They'll make examples of the omegas who've dared to think they're equal to betas and alphas. I won't allow that." "Then what do you suggest?" Théodore was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll offer myself in exchange for peace." The room exploded. "Absolutely not. That's suicide. You can't seriously be considering." "Enough." Théodore's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Bastien wants to prove that my way is wrong, that mercy is weakness. If I surrender myself, he gets his proof. He can execute me publicly, show the other provinces what happens to alphas who go soft. But in exchange, he leaves Montclair intact. He doesn't destroy what we've built. The people survive." "And the reforms?" Marguerite asked quietly. She'd been standing in the back of the room, listening. "What happens to them?" Théodore met her eyes. "They'll have to be reversed. That will be part of the deal. Sorry. I know how much they meant to you. To everyone. But it's the only way to save lives." Marguerite's face was pale but determined. "No. No. No. You don't get to give up. You don't get to surrender everything we've built just to save your conscience. 5 years ago, my daughter ran across a square to save me because she believed love was stronger than fear. You saw that. You understood it. You changed because of it. And now you're going to throw it all away. I'm trying to save lives. You're trying to take the easy way out." Marguerite stepped forward, her voice rising. "You're trying to be the martyr, the tragic hero who sacrifices himself for his people. But you know what? We don't need a martyr. We need a leader. We need someone who will stand and fight for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. The odds are impossible. We can't win this. Maybe not with swords. But there's more than one way to fight." Marguerite's plan was audacious, possibly insane, and absolutely brilliant. "Bastien is fighting us because he thinks we're weak," she said. "Because he thinks mercy makes us vulnerable. So we show him he's wrong. We show him exactly how strong we are." "How?" Luke demanded. We let him into the capital. We surrender. But not to him, to ourselves. We show him a province where every person, Alpha and Omega and Beta alike, stands together. Where 5,000 soldiers can't control 200,000 people who refuse to be controlled. That's rebellion. He'll slaughter everyone. Not if the other provinces are watching. Not if we make this public. Not if we turn his invasion into a spectacle that shows the entire world what happens when you try to crush people who've tasted freedom. Théodore stared at her. You want to invite him in. Surrender the capital. I want to show him that you can occupy a city but you can't occupy a people's hearts. I want every Omega, every Beta, every Alpha who believes in what we've built to stand together in the square, the same square where this all started, and face his army with nothing but our conviction that we're right. He could kill us all. He could. But he won't. Because killing 50,000 unarmed civilians in full view of envoys from every other province, that doesn't make him look strong. That makes him look like a monster. And even traditional alphas have limits. It was a gamble. Terrible, dangerous gamble. If this goes wrong, Théodore said quietly, it won't be me who dies. It will be all of you. Every person in that square. We know, Marguerite said. But 5 years ago you taught us that some things are worth risking everything for. Now we're teaching you the same lesson. They let Bastien's army march into the capital unopposed. His soldiers flooded the streets, weapons drawn, expecting resistance. They found none. Instead they found silence. Every shop was closed. Every window was shuttered. The streets were empty except for the marching soldiers. It was eerie, unsettling. Like occupying a ghost town. Bastien set up his command post in Théodore's hall and sent word. The Alpha would be executed at dawn in the town square. All citizens were required to attend. Dawn came gray and cold. The square filled slowly at first, then faster. Omegas came from the new housing projects. Betas came from their workshops. Even some Alphas came. The ones who'd embraced the reforms, who'd learned to see beyond hierarchy to humanity. By the time the sun fully rose, the square was packed. Not just hundreds of people. Thousands, 10,000, 20,000, more streaming in from every direction. They stood in silence, waiting. Bastien arrived with Théodore in chains. The deposed Alpha's face was battered, his clothes torn, but he walked with his head high. When he saw the crowd, when he saw how many had come, his eyes widened in shock. What is this? Bastien demanded. Your audience, Théodore said quietly. They dragged Théodore onto the platform. The executioner's block was already in place. One swing of the blade, and Montclair's experiment with mercy would end. Bastien stepped forward to address the crowd. I am Alpha Bastien of Fortcoeur. I have come to restore order to Montclair, to return this province to the proper ways, the traditional laws. Your Alpha betrayed everything our kind stands for. He showed weakness. He chose sentiment over strength. And now he will pay the price for that weakness. He gestured to Théodore. Let this be a lesson to any Alpha who forgets his place, who coddles the weak instead of leading the strong. This is what happens to those who value mercy over law. He nodded to the executioner. Proceed. That's when Céleste walked forward. She was 9 years old now. Taller, stronger, but still small for her age. Still with those enormous blue eyes that had haunted Théodore's dreams for 5 years. She walked through the crowd, and people parted for her. She climbed the platform steps, walked right up to Théodore. Hello, she said simply. Théodore's eyes filled with tears. Céleste, you shouldn't be here. Yes, I should. This is where I'm supposed to be. She turned to Bastien. You remember what happened 5 years ago in this square? Bastien frowned. What? I ran up onto a platform just like this one. And I put myself between my mother and Alpha Théodore's whip. And do you know what he did? I don't care. He stopped. He had every right to keep going. He had every reason to finish what he'd started. But he stopped because he saw that love was stronger than fear. That mercy was stronger than cruelty. That being an alpha isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about what you choose to protect. She looked out at the crowd. So here's what we're going to do. Everyone who Alpha Théodore has helped, everyone who's been fed by the Providence Fund, housed in the new buildings, given education or healthcare or just basic dignity, I want you to come up here. Stand with us. Stand between this man and our Alpha. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Marguerite stepped forward. She climbed the platform and stood beside her daughter. An old Omega woman came next. Then a Beta man with his young son. Then an Alpha woman Théodore had taught to read. And more. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. They poured onto the platform and around it, packing the space, forming a human wall between Théodore and the executioner. Young and old. Alpha and Omega and Beta. Rich and poor. All standing together. This is rebellion, Bastien snarled. This is a pack, Céleste interrupted. This is what you don't understand. You think packs are built on fear, on hierarchy, on the strong controlling the weak. But real packs are built on love, on loyalty, on every member protecting every other member because that's what families do. She gestured to the crowd. You can kill Alpha Théodore. You can kill me. You can kill all of us if you want. But then what? You'll have slaughtered tens of thousands of unarmed people in front of envoys from every province. You'll be remembered not as a strong alpha, but as a butcher, monster. And every alpha in every province will know that your way, the old way, leads only to death. Bastien looked at his soldiers. They were staring at the crowd, at the sheer number of people willing to die for their alpha. Their weapons were raised but their faces showed doubt. Lieutenant, Bastien said. Clear the platform. The lieutenant didn't move. Alpha. There are children in that crowd. Families. If we. That's an order. No, sir. With respect, I can't. One by one, Bastien's soldiers lowered their weapons. This is mutiny. This is mercy, the lieutenant said quietly. Something I'd forgotten until just now. Bastien stood alone, facing a crowd of 50,000 people who refused to back down. He could see envoys from other provinces watching from the edges of the square. He could see his own soldiers turning away from him. He had lost, not because Montclair was stronger, but because Théodore had built something Bastien never could, a people who would die for him because he'd been willing to live for them. Finally, Bastien turned and walked away. His army followed, most of them anyway. Some stayed, drawn by what they'd witnessed to join the strange, impossible experiment happening in Montclair. Théodore lived another 30 years after that day in the square. They were good years, not easy but good. The reforms continued, expanded, evolved. Slowly, grudgingly, other provinces began to adopt similar policies. The change was glacial but real. Céleste grew up to become one of the most influential advocates for Omega rights in the history of the provinces. She traveled extensively, speaking at gatherings, advising alphas, never backing down from what she believed. Her mother traveled with her for many years, the two of them a team, just as they'd always been. Marguerite lived to see her grandchildren. Céleste bonded with a kind beta named Thomas and had 3 children who grew up never knowing hunger, never knowing fear, never knowing what it meant to be treated as less. When Théodore died peacefully in his sleep at 75, surrounded by loved ones, the entire province mourned. His funeral drew thousands. Céleste gave the eulogy. 30 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd, I asked this man a question. I asked him why he'd changed his mind, why he'd chosen mercy over law. And he told me, because you showed me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose love over fear. She paused, tears streaming down her face. But the truth is, he taught me that lesson first. When he lowered that whip. When he chose to see my mother not as property but as a person. When he risked everything to become something better than what he'd been raised to be. He taught me that change is always possible. That it's never too late to choose love. That every moment is a chance to decide. Will we protect or punish? Will we build up or tear down? Will we choose the old ways or forge something new? She looked out at the crowd. Omega and Alpha and Beta, young and old, all gathered together. He chose to build. He chose to protect. He chose love. And because of that choice, all of us are here. Free. Cool. If that's his legacy. Not the laws he changed or the systems he reformed, but the hearts he opened, the lives he touched, the world he made better simply by choosing every day to be better himself. Years later, when Céleste was an old woman with silver in her hair and grandchildren of her own, her youngest granddaughter asked her the same question she'd once asked Théodore. Why was he special? Why do we still tell stories about him? Céleste thought for a long moment. She was in the cottage now, the same one she and her mother had been given all those years ago. It had been expanded, renovated, filled with life and laughter and love. Because he made a choice, she said finally. A choice to see instead of judge. To listen instead of command. To bend instead of break. And that choice rippled outward, touching thousands of lives, changing the world in ways he never imagined. Is that why you ran to save your mother? Because you wanted to change the world? Céleste laughed. No, child. I ran to save my mother because I loved her. Because the thought of losing her was more terrifying than anything else. I was 4 years old. I didn't know I was changing the world. I just knew I couldn't let her face that whip alone. But you did change the world. I suppose I did. But so did your great-grandmother, by loving me enough to risk everything. And so did Théodore by having the courage to change. And so did thousands of others who chose, in their own small ways, to be brave, to be kind, to choose love. She pulled her granddaughter close. And someday you'll have your own choice to make. Maybe not in a square with a whip. Maybe not in front of thousands of people. But you'll face a moment where you have to decide. Will you run toward danger to protect someone you love? Will you stand up for what's right even when it's hard? Will you choose mercy or cruelty, love or fear, the old ways or something better? What should I choose? Céleste smiled. The same thing I chose when I was your age. The same thing your great-grandmother chose. The same thing Théodore chose. Love, child. Always love. No matter what it costs. No matter how terrifying it is. Because in the end, love is the only thing that lasts. Love is the only thing that changes the world. Even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. Because that's when love matters most. Her granddaughter nodded seriously, considering this. Then, tell me the story again. About the square. So Céleste told the story one more time. The way she'd told it hundreds of times before to hundreds of people. The story of a mother who stole bread. An alpha who learned mercy. A child who ran toward danger instead of away. And somewhere, in some province, in some square, in some moment not yet written, another child listened to that story and learned the same lesson. Love is worth running for. Love is worth fighting for. Love is worth everything. It always has been. It always will be. If this story reached into your chest and grabbed your heart, if you felt tears building when Céleste threw herself across her mother's back, or when Théodore finally learned what it meant to choose mercy, or when 50,000 people stood together refusing to let cruelty win, then I need you to do something for me right now. Subscribe. Hit that button. 'Cause I have more stories like this. Stories about courage and transformation. Stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Stories about love winning even when it seems impossible. And then, in the comments below, tell me, what city are you watching from? I want to send you a hug. A virtual hug from one human to another, because we all need to know we're not alone. We're all standing in our own squares, facing our own impossible choices, deciding whether to run toward danger or away from it. And knowing that others are making that same choice, that we're all running toward love together, that makes all the difference. So tell me where you are. Let me know you heard this story. Let me know it meant something. Because stories only matter if they're shared. Love only multiplies when it's given away. And the choice to be brave, to be kind, to run toward instead of away. That choice echoes forward through time in ways we can never fully predict. Céleste made her choice at 4 years old. She changed the world without meaning to. What choice will you make?